And I just had these deep critiques of the Native American art collection in general, how all the lights are dim, that's all baskets, but there's no individual names of the artists, whereas basketry is extremely individual.
Hello, and welcome to Art Restart, where we explore how artists are reinventing their fields and building a new landscape for the arts. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, the producer and editor of this podcast, which is brought to you by the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Klamath Modoc visual artist Ka'ila Farrell-Smith. For Ka'ila, the land on which she lives and works is the raw material for her art, both metaphorically and, as you'll hear, quite literally. Ka'ila studied and lived in Portland, Oregon for many years until in November 2016, she spent 10 life-changing days at Standing Rock, North Dakota, protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline. There she met and worked alongside fellow Native artists. She also learned about the Jordan Cove Energy Project, a liquid natural gas pipeline that was threatening her Klamath Modoc ancestral homeland in southern Oregon. 2 years later, she moved to Modoc Point in that very homeland, where she jump-started a new chapter in her activism and artistry and scored a couple of big wins within her first year. She created her Land Back series of paintings, in which she incorporated pigments and minerals from the land beneath her feet into her paints, and she also successfully killed the Jordan Cove Energy Project. Now in 2024, represented by the Russo Lee Gallery in Portland, she's had her work exhibited in museums all over the country, including at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. One of her pieces is also in the Portland Art Museum's permanent collection. On the activist front, she is no less busy. She's combating lithium mining in native regions of southern Oregon and Nevada, and she's also currently suing the state of Oregon for conducting illegal surveillance on protesters. Like for real, like the case is Farrell-Smith versus Oregon. I started our interview by asking Ka'ila to describe the first painting she made once she'd made her big move and settled in her ancestors' land at Modoc Point.
Yeah, so the first series that I made after relocating to my ancestral homelands here at Modoc Point Studio was called the Land Back series. And so that series was from 2019 to 2021. And I was, again, mixing the wild harvested pigments. So like that charcoal from the wildfires from across the lake at Pelican Butte. I would hike up at those lakes and collect that charcoal. There's this chalk in Klamath Falls that my dad used to say that his grandma would eat. So I don't know if there's calcium in it. So it's kind of medicinal, but I ended up using that, mixing that with acrylic gel mediums, as well as some of this red earth from the Painted Hills. So that wild pigments. And then I was also collecting metal detritus. So just like metal objects that me and my partner, Kale, were finding, because this is where the land I'm on is 18 acres, right on close to the upper Klamath Lakes. I'm kind of right behind Chiloquin Ridge. It's juniper forest, ponderosa pine forest. And, it's an old ranch land. So I was finding shot up cans and weird metal grids, all kinds of funky machine parts that were on the land. And so I was stenciling with aerosols those metal objects, basically these metal detritus objects, with aerosol spray paint. I had the full respiratory mask on again because I was wanting to protect my body from the toxins that are, a part of painting, some of the painting materials.
Clearly your artistry and your activism are literally intertwined, given that you use materials from the earth you're trying to protect in your art. What do you think about your artist self and your artist spirit that makes you a particularly effective activist?
Art and activism and how it's combined together has been kind of the most difficult part of my practice, I think, for the last 20 years. But since after, Standing Rock and moving home in 2018 and working on stopping the Jordan Cove Energy Projects, I was kind of forced for it all to combine together. And it really is combined together. And the other part of my practice is that I'm a writer. So I actually just have a chapter that got published in a new academic book, which is about all of this. And I actually write about all of my research, all of the activism work, and then as well as the art studio practice. With the activism, with Jordan Cove, like I was offered the governor's show, to show my art in the Oregon governor's, her office, right? And so I used that as an opportunity. I accepted knowing that I was going to not do it to make a point. So I accepted the governor's show and then wrote, a very effective letter ultimately of why I'm opposed to the Jordan Cove Energy Projects. Because at that point in time, that it's a foreign corporation, Canadian corporation, and they had spent so much money on influencing our politicians and on propaganda campaigns. So mailing out huge, fancy, full color mailers, just trying to make, the Jordan Cove name be a positive name in the community. And it was very effective. So at that point in Portland, I think that's one of the big reasons why I left Portland is I was not finding really much support at all. There was a group of artists that came together and we were doing bird dogging. We'd know where the governor was going to be eating lunch, and we did huge art. We made huge painted banners with students at Pacific Northwest College of Art. We also had a collaboration with Just Seeds. So that's a printmaking group of artists that work on the frontline campaigns. And so we had Just Seeds came. And so we had beautiful screen printed signs made. So we had a really great activist art community and we were showing up, in Portland, but also in Salem. We were doing protests in Salem. And so it kind of culminated with me declining the art show to the governor's office and then getting my letter published in the Oregonian and then in the Herald and News, which is the Klamath Falls newspaper. Yeah, that was a big deal. And so of course it was reproduced online as well. But so I guess that's sort of how my art and activism kind of came together to being successful. And then once I moved back down here to Southern Oregon, I continued that work within my community. So I was a Fields Artist Fellow. So I was also on fellowship for about the first 3 to 4 years while I lived down here, which made that move and transition really feasible because I had funding from state fellowship organizations like through Oregon Humanities, Oregon Community Foundation. So I was the Fields Artist Fellow. And so the Fields Artist Fellowship was really about working with youth in the community. So I wasn't depending on gallery sales at that time. I was able to, I was on fellowship. So that was a really nice cushion to be able to transition my whole practice out of Portland.
I want to stop you and ask what the governor's reaction or response was to your declining.
Well, at the time, it was Governor Kate Brown. She was always considered neutral on the Jordan Cove Energy Projects, which I thought was kind of lame to say the least. So she never actually responded. I think she then offered the show to another Native artist in Portland. Her name is Brenda Mallory. And actually now Brenda and I are both signed artists with the Rusa Lee Gallery, which is in Portland, Oregon. But Brenda also declined the show to be in solidarity with me. And at that time, the Klamath tribes was opposed, and they were opposed to Jordan Cove. So I don't know if they offer it. So this was like that month of November, Native American month. And I think both of us declining it just made a statement. They never really said anything. Politicians, they just kind of ignore it and hope it goes away, I think. But ultimately, we ended up getting, I think, Jeff Merkley, our Senator Jeff Merkley was the first one to flip. All of these politicians were pro Jordan Cove. Through our pressure and through our public comments, we were able to flip politicians one by one. And then ultimately, Kate Brown, our governor, had to be on our side because we ended up suing the state of Oregon sued the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. And I was the lead. I wrote a letter at that time. I was on the board of Rogue Climate, which is a big nonprofit out of Southern Oregon. And we were representing like 700,000 people. And we had stopped every permitting process. The company didn't get one permit, so they never were able to put a shovel in the ground. And we ultimately won. And Jordan Cove is dead. Currently, I'm working on stopping the lithium mines in northern Nevada and southern Oregon. So I'm completely in another, kind of fight right now. But with Jordan Cove in the state of Oregon, we knew that they were surveilling us, illegally surveilling us through our devices and through social media apps. And that's what I'm proving. And actually, up to this point, we have a new judge now, and they are siding with us, with the plaintiffs. So the case is Farrell-Smith versus the state of Oregon. DOJ. Yeah. So I'm following in my father's footsteps.
Because your father was also a complainant in an important lawsuit, right?
Yeah, Al Smith versus the state of Oregon. And that was the unemployment division. So it was a Native American freedom of religion court case that went to the Supreme Court in the 1990s. So I was 7 years old, and I remember going to DC for my dad's case at that time.
Through all this work, how do you make sure that you leave yourself enough psychic space to spend time in the studio and concentrate on your art making? Do you need to make an active choice to remove that other stuff and give yourself space to make your art?
Yes, my studio practice. So I've been as dedicated to my studio practice as I have been to environmental advocacy work my entire adult life. So when I graduated from undergrad at the age of 21, I don't really like the combination of capitalism and art. And that part has always been really difficult.
You're not the only one, you'll be happy to know.
Yeah, exactly. So that was always something I've been trying to navigate. And so I kind of went right into the environmental organizing, grassroots organizing, environmental advocacy work straight out of undergrad. So I worked as a grassroots organizer and canvasser for about 8 years in my 20s. And I really just focused mostly on that. I'd always paint though. I'd always have a studio, somewhere I lived in a lot of different houses and with a lot of different people in Portland for many years. But now, I've have that dedication. I have a big studio here, and I live in a log house at Modoc Point, a big, huge greenhouse. We have a chicken coop, and I have a big studio. There's a barn and a lot of land, and I have a beautiful view of the mountains. So I'm kind of constantly in a meditative state in my home here. For me, it's also really cold here in the winter. So I'm gearing up. I finished my series last year called Ghost in the Machine. And that was really a meditative series. So for me, the painting, I work on multiple paintings at once. So I worked on 21 paintings over 2 years. And that series is called Ghost in the Machine. And they're monochrome. So for me, they're black and white. Of course, I mix all my own blacks and grays. And I have that wild harvested topsoil from the lithium, where the lithium is in the high desert east of me. And so that whole series is really about bringing awareness to the lithium mining and what that's going to be if we don't stop it, because it's terrifying. So I kind of, I'm doing the activism, doing the work, the community work, but I'm also harvesting the materials. I'm thinking about, the paintings. And for me, that is that meditative healing space that I need personally for myself to be able to be balanced in the wake of taking on such heavy work.
It sounds heavenly, I have to say. It sounds so beautiful.
It is. It's a harsh place. It's a harsh place, but it's also just very powerful and inspirational as well. I just wanted to make one more point about what brought me home. And I just want to bring it back to my father, because actually my practice is really linked to my father's life, his experiences, especially with colonialism and settler colonialism in the state of Oregon, because my father was elderly during my childhood. So Al Smith, the late Alfred Leo Smith, was born 1919 here in Modoc Point, and he passed in 2014. So he was 95 years old. So that was 10 years ago. So it's been 10 years since my father passed. I was very close with him. My whole family, we went to DC. So I have my mom, Jane Farrell, and then I have a younger brother, Lalick Farrell-Smith. And me and Lalick are the youngest of Al's 9 children. Me and Lalick we were born great aunties, and he's great uncle. So we have lots of nieces and nephews, and I have a big family. So I have a lot of people that I'm an auntie to a lot of people down here. And so that's been beautiful to reconnect, but it really was bringing my father's ashes back home, because that was the hardest thing for my father, was to return back here. He was ripped away from his grandparents and mother, at a very young age, and put into the boarding school systems. Our tribe was terminated in the 1950s. So we actually don't have a land base. We don't have a reservation in Klamath. So there's a lot of historical traumas, and it was really difficult. And, my father in the Chiloquin, and during those years, it was really hard. And after termination, there was just, it's very sad. So there's that historical trauma. So for me, when I brought my father's ashes back home, I put him into the Williamson River, which is where he grew up playing. And so I live about 5 miles maybe from where my dad grew up, which is my ancestors' our ancestral homeland, which unfortunately was sold or stolen at a very, it's a sad story, but, I wanted to relocate my life and my practice and my focus back here with that, where my people are from. So my family's homeland. So I can go and visit, and I also go and take care of my family's, grave sites, which is something we do for Memorial Day every year. We, go and clean them up, and everybody goes and visits, the ancestors. So I just wanted to put that in because I think that's a really important reason for why I moved back home.
So part of your activism is really about stopping colonial methods of extraction. So I want to talk about the art world ecosystem, which many would say is extractive as well, and ask you if you've sought changes in the way you work with galleries, museum, and collectors, if there's anything in the art world ecosystem that you would like to see reinvented.
I guess how I've done that is through how I've sold work to museums. So I guess I'll just start with the painting. It's called After Boarding School in Mourning. It's a portrait I created in 2011. It's based off of an Edward Curtis photograph of a young girl called Mojave Girl. And I basically painted it in color, and I ended up kind of chopping the hair off of it. So, because when the native kids were taken from their families and put into boarding school, their hair was chopped off. They, were forced to speak English, wear the American clothes or the boarding school outfits or whatever. And my dad always described the boarding school era for him, because he went to many different schools, including Chamawa, which is, still in existence here in Oregon, and then the Stewart Indian Boarding School, which is in Carson City, Nevada. And I just say that because my father was really close with the Paiutes, the Shoshones and Bannocks, because I think he played, on the sports teams and during the boarding school times. So I made that painting, and it was purchased by the Native American Art, I think there's a council. And so that piece was brought into the permanent collection in 2012. So I was actually just starting graduate school at that time. So that was an interesting, I was selling a piece through the Portland Art Museum collection, but also going through graduate school, which was interesting because they're, graduate school, they're trying to break you down and make me not paint anymore.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of I feel like graduate programs are just kind of traumatizing, and then you come out and then you figure out what your voice is or something like that. So anyways, at that time though, I was giving trainings, I was doing, art talks in the massive auditorium in the Portland Art Museum to the docents, because this is where you have these issues within these museums. At least for me, I have this long relationship with the Portland Art Museum because PNCA used to be the art school that was affiliated with the museum. So I know the Portland Art Museum very well. I know the collection. And I just had these deep critiques of the Native American art collection in general, how all the lights are dim, that's all baskets, but there's no individual names of the artists, whereas basketry is extremely individual. The intimacy and hand woven, weaving these master baskets. It's an incredible collection, but it's sort of like the whole design of the Native American art collection is that there's no individuals. It's in the past, and you just kind of study it, and it's in the past. And then there really wasn't any or very much contemporary art in the Native American art collection. So around this 2012 time, the museums were starting to change. And so I ended up, I don't even remember if they paid me or not at this point, but I was training the docents who are all volunteers, right? So the docents are volunteers. A lot of them are elderly. A lot of them are white, I guess, or yeah, I guess I don't know what the terms are. So at that time too, I was also
we can picture the stereotypical docent.
Okay, yeah. I don't want to be
bless their hearts, but we got it.
Okay, yes, you get what I'm saying. So there's elderly volunteers, and at that time, I was also working for a camp called Journeys in Creativity. It was based through the Oregon College of Arts and Craft. Unfortunately, that art school is now closed too. You can kind of see why I moved. The art school started closing down. There's just big changes happening in Portland. But at that time, it was a camp for Native American students, aged 15 to 19. And it was a 2-week camp, and it was at this art school, and it was really cool. It was fun. I loved I was a mentor for these students. And so I would take groups of students, and they're all Native kids, brown, black-skinned children, youth people. And I'd take them to the museum, and they would get harassed by these docents. And it was really frustrating to me. So I ended up when I had the chance to train the docents, I kind of told them like, y'all need to stop like chasing us around the museum. And like, it was just like really uncomfortable. And then the kids don't feel like they have a place or they're welcomed in like the museum. Right. So that was, I've done that kind of work. I've also through those camps, I've been on steering committees for the Journeys and Creativity camps. So dealing with the presidents of these art schools. And, it takes a lot of effort but time. It just takes time to like make changes, really internal changes within institutions. And I've just had, I think I've had the community behind me. So I also sold a painting to the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, which is in Eugene. But that was like a really interesting experience because they tried to lowball me right on the cost. And I was like, no, like I know this painting's worth at least this much. And I didn't budge. So, I've kind of had to like not get pushed around, you know what I mean? And hold your ground when it comes to sales. And I've had to learn all of that on my own or just make it up because they don't teach you that in art school, like the business, like how to hustle.
Have you had any mentors to help you with the business side of things? Not
really. I mean, me and other artists that are all going through the same thing at the same time are going through similar things and will, talk shop behind the scenes and then at least like be like, I've had other artists that are like, you should raise your prices or, like artists that are at different levels than I am. Like, so that kind of like, colleague mentorship, I think. But then again, I've also like watched other artists. I mean, this is how I've made it this far is that
it makes me think that artists that come straight out of graduate school and are completely untrained in the business side of things are really easy pickings for collectors, museums, and galleries, right?
That's the thing is it's kind of like, what school did you go to? I don't know. I graduated from a state school where I've seen other artists who graduate from, Yale programs or Ivy League school. They get a totally different like opportunities straight out of grad school than I was offered, I guess. But then again, I've also been really, what would be the word? I bounce back and forth between when I'm making art and like working to be in that art world and then also being like, I'm running off to the desert and I'm going to go, find my people, in the, the Paiute, Shoshone, Bannock homelands. And, I want to go back and go to Sweat Lodge and return to the land and, just camp out. And that fills my spirit, and it feels like almost like a purpose, so, but then that's where I get inspiration to make my next 21 paintings.
I want to end with your art, which is you mentioned you were starting a new series. Can you describe it?
I'm joining a collaboration this year. So the next work that I'm going to start is part of this. It's called Oregon Origins Project. And it's a collaboration through Reed. I think it's Reed College in Portland. And Matthew Packwood, he's a composer. He is creating a collaborative work. So it's all about the geological events that created Oregon. And I'm going to be focusing on Crater Lake, which is basically like the Cascade Mountains. So I'm going to so there's going to be music, compositions, but I think there's maybe a handful of visual artists and our work will be kind of like visually behind the orchestra. I'm not quite sure. I'm right now reading the updated contract and I'm going to sign it. But I thought that this was good because it'll give me something to focus on. And, going deep into the heart of my homelands is Crater Lake. And it's a epic. I don't know if you've ever been. It's one of the most incredible places in the whole world. And I live just right. It's right here.
It's on my bucket list.
You got to make it up there. And I don't know. It's been calling to me anyways. I was up there. We had family visiting, so take family up there. You can hike all the way down. And I jumped in Crater Lake for the first time. But, there's mythology around Giwas is the Klamath word for Crater Lake. But, it was really like only medicine people or for vision quests, spiritual people would go up there. So there's a taboo. I don't know, you have to prepare yourself to go up to Crater Lake, to Giwas. So, but it's very interesting. So I'm thinking like molten lava, like fire, lava, reds, oranges, and then deep, deep water. It's the deepest lake in at least I think the upper states. I think it's a really amazing place.
If you'd like to learn more about Ka'ila and read a longer written version of the interview, please just head to uncsa.edu/artrestart. If you are so inclined, please leave us a rating or review on whatever podcasting platform you use. It helps us find new listeners. Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Piercarlo Talenti, and on behalf of the Thomas S. Keenan Institute for the Arts, thank you for listening.